Hey everyone, this is Jason Clemmons, Doctor of Chiropractic at the Rock Health and Wellness Center, and you are listening to Life with Jason Clemmons, DC. This is Thursday, October 5th, and we are coming to you live from the studios at the Rock Health and Wellness Center, and again, we are excited to be here. So we had a great show last night. I probably didn't do the best job of breaking down that book. It is a great book, and the Hacking of the American Mind by Dr. Robert Lustig. I've learned a lot from Dr. Lustig. I really do appreciate all of his hard work and his intelligence and all the things that he brought to us last night. So I hope maybe somebody got something out of that show. It was good, and I got some feedback from it. So I really appreciate everybody that was listening, and I hope you guys are enjoying the show, and I hope that you're learning something from the show. And I'm kind of thinking that maybe we are, because the feedback I'm getting here in the office, people are talking about it a little bit, asking me questions about things that they learned during the show. And that's what that's all about. So we come to you every night from 6 to 7, right after Pride on Texas. And we're live on 98.7 FM Walk by Faith Radio. So we have a live radio show going at the same time as we're doing our Facebook show and our YouTube show and our X show. So all you guys that are regular listeners, you hear all that every time, and you know all that. But if you're new to the show, you haven't ever seen us before, and you want to go back and catch up, you can go back to YouTube at Health from the Rock, or you can go back and look on our Facebook page at the Rock Health and Wellness Centers, and you can catch all the shows in one of those two places. And if you want to catch up and I try to keep it in the titles what we talked about that night. This week we've been working on definitions, and so other than Wednesday nights, and Wednesday nights is our book review night, and we've so far we've had some pretty cool books that we've broken down. We've broken down The End of Alzheimer's by Dr. Dale Bredesen. We've broken down The Body Keeps the Score, and we've broken down Spark, and then last night we broke down Hacking of American Mind. So I apologize to the radio people, the listeners. Last night, whenever I have a storm come through or some things, software updates or whatever in the studio over at Walk by Faith, sometimes we're not able to remote in, and that's what happened to us last night. So you guys were listening to a different show or some sort of different programming last night. So I'm really sorry that I missed you. But if you guys want to go back and listen to that book review, then you can catch it on one of those social media channels as well. And because it's really got some good information, whether I presented it all that fabulous or not, it's probably, I'm sure I could do better, but that's what we're trying to do. And, as I was watching or getting ready for the show to come on, I was listening to the intro, and it was like talking about life and what do you want from it? Right? What do you want to do with it? And how good could you be if you were as good as you could be? And that actually came up today in the office. I had a patient ask me, she's like, how do you feel about alcohol? What do you do with alcohol? And I was like, I'm not interested. I'm done with it. And so we had this long conversation about alcohol. Well, I never was much of an alcohol guy anyway. I didn't drink a drop of alcohol before I was 21. And then we went through a season there. And then we just, for the last couple of decades, it's just been a just a social type of thing. We might have a margarita if we go get Mexican food or something like that. Or if we're on vacation, we go to Las Vegas just for some seminars or whatever. We might have a drink or something, but I probably have had, 3 or 4 drinks of alcohol in the last 7 or 10 years. I just got to where it's just not something that we do. We never have done that in our house. But at the place that I'm at now, and the conversation that we had this morning was, at some point, it's like, you got to define your why. You got to define actually what you're up to. And it's like, why would you be, what is alcohol doing for you? And why do you feel like, you're not living if you're not drinking some alcohol, right? Because it's like, come on, man, don't be such a party pooper, and don't be such a killjoy or whatever. What's your problem? You can't go out and have a drink every once in a while? Sure, I can if I want to, if it fits within my why. But it's like, what is actually happening? Where does that sentence come from? And and so we had this really great conversation this morning. Where does that sentence come from? Where is that makes me feel like I'm missing out on something if I don't go out and have a drink with my friends, or if we don't have a drink at the house? Where did I come up with that idea that that I'm missing out on something, right? So, because I've said that same thing to myself about peanut butter cups for 50 years, right? M&Ms. Said that same thing about that too. Like, come on, man. Like you can splurge every once in a while. You can just have a cheat day or whatever. And man, if you can just start to define your why, if you can really talk about and define what you're up to, it really becomes kind of interesting when you make those choices, how you don't have any desire whatsoever to get into that mode at all. And last night on the show, when we were when we were breaking down the um, the Dr. Lustig book, one of the things that he showed us last night in the book was that motivation and reward pathway between dopamine and serotonin, right? And one of the things that he showed us was that dopamine bell curve that we get. And if you draw the line kind of in the middle of that bell curve, that's kind of the sweet spot where you want to get your dopamine from. And if you're on the low side of that, then you don't have any motivation. If you're on the left of that sweet spot on that bell curve, you don't have any motivation. And if you're on the right side, then you get irritated and or irritable. And and so you don't want too much dopamine and you don't want not enough dopamine. You kind of want to be in that sweet spot right there. And I'm kind of getting to the point where I'm going to argue that all those things that we do that make us feel like we're not living, all those things that conversation that we have with ourselves that tells us, man, like I just sometimes I just need a cookie. Sometimes I just need some chocolate. Sometimes I just need to have some ice cream or whatever. I'm just going to present for your consideration, and I'm talking to you. I'm talking to each individual person that's listening to this show. I'm talking to you as an individual person afterwards, later tonight when you come back to listen to this show. I'm talking to the individuals, every one of us. It's just me and you sitting here talking to each other. I'm not making some blanket statement that fits across the board to all these different people. I'm just talking about straight up. I'm just talking about me and you having a conversation. And I want to present for consideration that if you're saying that to yourself, you might be over here on this low side. You might be over here on this low side of the bell curve where you don't have enough dopamine. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to increase your dopamine externally because you're not getting the proper dopamine internally. Because in nature, you don't need that much. In nature, you get it from the pursuit of something. In nature, you get that from there's that drive not to starve to death. And you get dopamine from seeing people's faces. You get dopamine from the smile of a child. I got some today from a picture of a little puppy dog that some of my patients got, right? You get from the sunsets that we have in West Texas. That's all you need. That's enough. That's enough to keep your brain in a sweet spot right there. And if you're getting that proper up and to the right and over to the left pathway that I know that you're tired of me talking about, but I'm not going to stop talking about it because it's the best thing I know for you. If you're I just want to present that consideration to you. I just want you to maybe think that the reason I'm having to tell myself that I need a drink is because I'm trying to get this external level of dopamine up so that I can feel alive. that I can actually feel like life is worth living, that I can actually have some motivation in order to get that there. And because you know what happens after you have it, you crash, right? The other side. The patient was telling me, or her statement was, is that when she has a drink at night, she's done for the last 2 nights, she's had a drink before she's gone to bed and she slept horribly. And then but she had come off, or she'd done that a couple of nights ago. And then for 4 nights in a row, she didn't have anything to drink and she slept great. And then last night she had a margarita and then she went back and slept horribly. And that's when I made the statement to her. I was like, that's what I'm talking about right there. What I'm talking about is, how does it disrupt the best you could be? If you could be the best you could be, like, what would the world be like? Like, what would our community be like if we were at that place, right? And I don't know, it's just such an awesome thought for me. And I was listening this morning, I was listening to several Jordan Peterson videos, and man, what a cool dude. Like, if you ever want to go back and get motivated and learn some stuff and learn some serious deep stuff, that, I mean, he is so fantastic to go back and listen to, because he's just got some great stuff. And some of the things that I was listening to him, it says, this lesson from the Bible will make you unstoppable. Big 58-minute lecture he did at a university. And then there was a podcast full of inflammatory things is another one. This speech will forever be forgotten. This speech will never be forgotten was another one that I listened to this morning. And so that's just what I listened to this morning, when I had a little bit of free time, and I was listening to some of those teachings by Dr. Peterson, and that's the essence of it. He was the one that was like, come on, man, think of the most important thing you can think of. Think of the most awesome thing that you could think of, and then set yourself up every single day to do that. And just see how much of that you could actually get accomplished. And that's what's so awesome about my friend Dr. Fraley and Ridosa that we had on the show. He's one of those dudes that just about does that. I mean, the guy maximizes his life for his passion and his thing. And then you start to look at, how do those things like alcohol get in my way? How do they disrupt my sleep? How do they disrupt the way my body functions? I don't function so good when I'm inflamed, right? And it's not about whether you can or can't have the alcohol. It's about whether or not you're really playing to win. And so we had that conversation this morning, and when we were finished, it was really, really good. And I may be a nerd at this point in my life, because I'm just like, man, I just think if we really could be as good as we could be, that the world would be a better place. And that's part of the reason we have the show every night. Sometimes I'm good at it, sometimes I'm not so good at it, but I'll tell you one thing, I'm not going to quit it, and we're going to keep after it, and we're going to see if we can help you. I'm talking to you. Then that's what I want to do, is I just want to help you live a better life by sharing all the things that I've learned along the way. So we've been working on definitions. So let's get to some more definitions tonight, and I'm going to try to slow down a little bit, and I'm going to try to make it clear exactly what we're talking about, so I don't lose you along the way. I've gotten a little feedback that sometimes I go a little fast. And for you advanced people, bear with me, because I'm talking to a lot of different folks out there, and I'm trying to help them. So I want to get into some ideas of just there. This article here from the Handbook of Clinical Neurology is just talking about the functional anatomy of the spine. And all of us have a spine, but we don't all necessarily know what all the parts are and what they mean and where they are. And so I wanted to go through some of this tonight, and then I wanted to follow it up with a few articles that relate to the abnormal function of the spine and how it actually affects your life. Because when your spine's not working, then your brain's not working. And when your spine's not working properly, it creates a state of degeneration or decay or dis-ease. And that's that's kind of what we're trying to just stop, right? We're trying to get you to function as optimally as possible. So we need those parts of your spine to function as optimally as possible. So I just wanted to hit on some of these points tonight about the functional anatomy of the spine. And this is from the Handbook of Clinical Neurology, 2016, volume 136, pages 675 through 688 right there. And the focus of this paper is on clinical relevance of the mechanisms of spinal injury and spinal pain. But they go through here functionally. There is a remarkable difference between the design and function of the cervical spine and that of the lumbar spine. So just to start off with, the parts, the physical parts from a bone standpoint, because I know people out there get confused. They will say, I think it's my L6, right? Or I think that maybe I have this thing in my neck, this L something in my neck, right? So the way we name the bony parts, I didn't name them. Probably some Latin guy named them or something, right? The way we name the bony parts of the spine, the bones that are related to your spine, the first one I want to talk about is called your occiput. And your occiput is your skull bone. And in chiropractic, that's how we determine it. Now, your skull is made up of different bones. You've got multiple bones inside your head, your skull. There's different bones, but there's a joint between your skull and the very first vertebra in your spine. And the first vertebra in your spine is called an atlas. And it basically holds up the world, just like Atlas holds up the world. It's the C1. So your first 7 vertebrae underneath your skull is called your cervical spine. And there's 7 vertebrae right there. And the C1, and it goes C1 through C7. So you just go right down the list right there. And that's the cervical area. That's your neck. Those are the bones in your neck. And those bones, that C1, it just has these big platforms. And those big platforms basically make a joint with your skull. Your skull just sits down on that C1. And it creates problems when that's not functioning properly, or if the skull moves back and forth. And if you're old enough to remember, for those of you who are listening who are old enough to remember those original computer monitors that came in that little circular dish looking thing, and you could like change the angle of the monitor by sliding it back and forth in that little round dish, right? It looked like a little like a wall or whatever that was sitting there, and that then the monitor set inside that little round dish, and you could move it back and forth. Well, that's what happens with your skull and your atlas. That atlas has those 2 big platforms on it, and your skull actually moves in relationship to that atlas. So the skull can go one direction and the atlas can go the other direction. And you've got ligaments that are surrounding those joints, and you've got muscles that are surrounding those joints, and that will cause strain or tension within those muscles and those ligaments that are around that joint right there. And when you get that muscle strain, then that muscle will sometimes spasm, or it will create a tightness, and that tightness will interfere with the nerves that are running through that muscle. So you've got all kinds of nerves that are actually coming off your spinal cord all the way from top to bottom. But in that cervical spine right there, so you get that headache, right? A lot of times you can have that headache that starts right back here in the back, and then it comes all the way up over the top behind your eyeball. And we all get those sometimes, right? Most of us do. There's a bunch of us that have that. It's like, oh man, I know what you're talking about, Dr. C. That's that little place right there at the base of my skull, right on the back. I could just put my finger on it right there, and it just radiates right up over the top of my head and right behind my eyeball. Well, what's happening right there is there's a whole section of muscles and bone. You got the atlas, you got the second bone in the neck, the C2 is called the axis. And then you've got the occiput, and they are subluxated. That's our word that we use in chiropractic. There's interference on your nervous system coming from the abnormal function of that joint right there between your occiput and your atlas. And that can create that headache that comes behind your eyeball. And a lot of times it's related to the malfunction of that joint. So that's the first part. Right up there at the top, you've got your occiput, and then you have your 7 cervical vertebrae. And C1 is a little bit different. It doesn't have the typical features of any of the other vertebrae. C2 through C7 are pretty common in the way that they're built. But C1, the atlas, is actually a ring. And C2 is a little bit different because it has this little thumb-like projection that comes out of the top of C2, and the atlas actually fits on the top of that thumb-like projection. And that's called your dens. And so you may have heard of someone before who had a dens fracture, or if you were to fall forward and hit your head on the wall and extend yourself back like that, you can get what's called a dens fracture. And that's a dangerous little deal. That's an unstable area right there, because there's that atlas is hooked to that dens, and your spinal cord comes out of your skull and runs right through the middle of your atlas. And so that dens is supposed to keep that very secure right there. And if that breaks, that can slide around, and that could be deadly right there. So that is a very important area. That's why it's so important when a patient comes in and they talk about their neck hurts or whatever. You got to go through your history with them, and you got to say, hey, listen, what caused your problem? And they say, well, I just went to bed last night, and then I woke up this morning and my neck hurts. All right, well, the possibilities that you broke your neck in the middle of the night sleeping are very low. But how about when the person comes in and say, well, I was chasing a coyote across the pasture on my four-wheeler, and he dove off of an old roadbed, and I just dove right off the top of him after him, and I flipped my four-wheeler, and I came right over the handlebars of my four-wheeler, and I smashed my cowboy hat right up in the dirt on the other side of that little roadbed. I actually had that conversation one day with one of my ranchers, and he was like, man, my neck's sore. Well, as a provider, it's very important for me to differentiate between the two right there. The possibility that you broke your neck just going to sleep is very, very low. You got to have some sort of cancer or some sort of major problem in your neck for that to happen. You probably didn't break your neck. But if you flipped over your four-wheeler and landed on your forehead, going 20, 30 miles an hour on your four-wheeler trying to kill a coyote, that's a total that we got to put the brakes on right there. We got to say, whoa, hold on. We have to evaluate what's happening with you so that we don't make a mistake and hurt you, right? So that's that beginning stage right there is what we're talking about when we're talking about the occiput, the atlas, and then we start getting into the different parts down from there of the cervical spine. And then when you get past the cervical spine, you get into the thoracic spine. And the thoracic spine is the area that's connected to your ribs. And that's one of the ways that I remember it, is that you have 12 sets of ribs. You have 12 pairs of ribs, and they start above your clavicle, above your collarbone. So if you actually come up here and take your finger and touch above your collarbone, that's where you'll get into your actual first rib right up here. And that starts your thoracic spine. And it's usually, if you put your hand on the back of your neck, down at the bottom, and you kind of have that big bony part that sticks out down there, that's usually either C7 or T1. So when you get into the thoracic spine, we use the T, and then so it goes from T1 to T12, and each one of those bones has ribs attached to each side of them. And there's a joint where the rib and the bone comes together, and the rib actually fits on the vertebrae in two different places. it fits right up next to the body of the vertebrae, which is the big bony part. And then there's little extensions that come off the side called the transverse processes. And that rib will actually that rib will actually fit on that transverse process as well. So sometimes people actually get a rib that slips out of place. And if you've had one before, you know exactly what that feels like. It's very uncomfortable. It feels every time you take a breath, because when you breathe in, your when you breathe in, your rib cage expands, and when you breathe out, your rib cage comes down. And if that little part of the rib is not sitting on that transverse process properly, if it slips just a millimeter or a micromillimeter, then I'm getting a text that says, yes, very painful. Yeah, you felt one of those before. I know. That little rib, when it's not sitting in there just right, every time you try to take a deep breath, it feels like you're getting stuck with an ice pick. And sometimes if it's on the left side, you'll feel like you're having a heart attack. It'll scare you so much that you may end up in the emergency room, and all that happened is that rib kind of moved out of place. And it didn't dislocate, it just barely slipped, just a little, but that's enough to kind of kick it out of gear right there and not let it move like it's supposed to. We got a break on the radio, so we'll be back in just a minute. Yeah, if you're on the Facebook group, you know what that's and if you've ever had one of those ribs, like the um, JT is texting me right here, and he said, yes, very painful. Yeah, it is. Every time you take a breath in, it feels like you're getting stuck with an ice pick, and it's just so miserable. And so that rib can move off of that little platform, that transverse process platform, and that can sure cause a lot of pain right there. Now, there's other things that mimic the rib being out of place. So sometimes you can have a disc problem in your neck, and it refers to those ribs, and then that hurts just as bad. But it you a lot of times you'll also get something that comes down your shoulder, or it starts going into your hand. And so that's something that you kind of got to watch out for, is that it hurts in the same place. It hurts on the back, like right between your spine and your shoulder blade. It's like really tender right there. Well, that can be a rib, but at the same time, it can also be a disc in the neck that's kind of putting pressure on a nerve root at the neck, and that can refer down to that same spot. And it took me a long time to figure that out, because I kept adjusting people's ribs, and it wasn't a rib subluxation, it was a neck problem. And once we started addressing the disc in the neck, then we started solving that problem right there. So that's just a little side piece of information about the differences between the way those two things fire and the way that you feel them. And so the way you usually get those ribs out of place is if you push or pull outside your frame. So putting your arms wide and pushing something or pulling something, like if you were going to try to like get a can of paint, like you had a 5 gallon can of paint that was in the bed of a pickup truck, and you try to reach over the top of the pickup truck and pull that can of paint out of the back of that truck. That's something that you might make that rib slip just a little. I did it one time trying to get sweaters out of the top of a closet. I did that same deal. I had 4 sweaters stacked up together in the top of the closet, and I wanted the one on the bottom, so I reached with one hand to hold the sweaters, and I actually pulled with the other hand. And when I did that, that rib just went, and then right out of its little platform, and man, it just like it just sucks up right there. Like you get like a spasm on top of that, and then all of a sudden it hurts. So we're back from our break, so let me get them started on the radio. Okay, everybody, we're back, and this is Life with Jason Clemmons, DC, and we're coming to you on 98.7 FM Walk by Faith Radio and Facebook Live at the Rock Health and Wellness Centers, at Health from the Rock on YouTube, and X. Dr. Jason Clemmons, I believe, is the one that on our X platform, which used to be called Twitter, if you're not up to that yet. So I guess I should hit that. Hey, everybody, we're back. I didn't hit the mics on. Sorry. Sorry if I missed you right there, but we're back live on the radio now, and you're listening to Life with Jason Clemmons, DC, and we're talking about spinal anatomy because we're working through definitions tonight. And we've been working through definitions all week, other than last night where we broke down the book, Hacking of the American Mind. So we're talking about the thoracic spine, the T spine. And the thoracic spine has 12 vertebrae. And then every vertebrae has 2 ribs on it. One goes to the right, one goes to the left. So you got 12 pairs of ribs. Then once you get down past the thoracic spine, now you get into the lumbar spine. And the lumbar spine is going to have, you've got 5 vertebrae in the lumbar spine. And so L1 through L5. And kind of the way that you know where to find those is if you come in and you put your hands on your hips and you feel the bone and you just keep coming up until you get on the top of that bone that's on your hips. That's called your ilium. And if you get on the top of that bone right there, right to the very top of it before you get to ribs, so there's a little gap of softness between the top of that bone and the bottom of the rib. And that little area, if you just traveled right straight backward, you would be right spinous process, the back part of the L4 vertebrae. So you can kind of say, okay, well, L5 is maybe about an inch and a half lower. And then that's L4 is right on the top of where you come in from the side. And then L3 would be working your way up. So you can go up an inch in the L3, and you could go up an inch. And I don't remember exactly we learned all that stuff when I was in chiropractic school, but I don't remember exactly what the distance is. But you can kind of see that you get into lumbar spine area a little bit higher up than you think. And so, or maybe you don't think, but that's still your lumbar spine right there. And that lumbar spine is really built. It's built for shock absorption. It's that the lumbar discs are well designed to sustain compression loads, but rely on posterior elements to limit axial rotation. All right, let me break that down for you. The lumbar discs are designed to sustain compression. They're designed to put pressure straight down on the disc, but they rely on the backside of the bones, which we call facet joints, and the joints that make the top of one bone and the top of another one. In the thoracic spine, they kind of overlap. In the lumbar spine, they turn and they face at a little bit different angle right there. But those joints on the back that we call facet joints, that's what helps us keep from rotating. And that's what it's saying right there. Limit that axial rotation. We don't want to rotate. And especially, we don't want to rotate our lumbar spine when we load it. If you put pressure down on that, disc, then that what will happen is when you pressurize that disc, the middle of that disc wants to push outward. And the middle of that disc is called the nucleus. And the nucleus, so if you have I'm going to draw it for you guys on Facebook. So you have you have a disc that looks like that if you're looking from top down to it. And the middle of that is the nucleus. And it's kind of a fluid field. It's kind of a gross thing. I think we went over it on the show before. And this outer ring that looks like a tree, this outer part is called the annulus. And whenever you push straight down on that, because fluid doesn't compress, what you get is you get forces from that nucleus that push out against that annulus. And that tightens it all up. And the annulus is actually attached to the vertebra above. So if you look at it from the side, you have a vertebra and a vertebrae. I'm not even showing you this. Here, hang on. Just there. It looks like that. So if you have two vertebrae together, and that one's a little flat, but then you have a disc that's right there. And so if you press down and you load that disc, it's going to push that nucleus out towards the outer, and it's going to tighten all that up right there. But this disc is actually glued to the bottom right there. And so that the anatomy of the spine allows you to load the disc with a lot of weight, but you have to be super careful when you load not to rotate, because if you rotate the fibers of the annulus, and I know we've gone over this on a previous show, but loading and rotation will cause disc bulging or injury to the disc. And there's a couple of different ways that those disc bulges happen, but let's just say for a second that your spinal cord is back behind there, and then that disc, if this starts to tear on the inside, or you get this little bit of a rupture or an opening, and then that nucleus starts working its way between the rings on the annulus, then it can find another little place and kind of work its way back around, and then pretty soon you've got this increased amount of but increased amount of nucleus right there, and that can start to make that disc bulge around it. And when that happens, if it bulges into that nerve, now you're going to feel some sort of problem right there. And so that's something that is very common, right? It's very common. Matter of fact, the article that we're talking about, one of the it's when it's talking about the disc, is that's the most common cause of chronic low back pain is internal disc disruption. So something going on inside that disc right there, internal disc disruption, is the most common cause of chronic low back pain. So what you want to do is make sure that whenever you're moving that lumbar spine, that whenever you've got it loaded, you don't want to twist. And one of the things, and I think we talked about this too, one of the things that is very common in housework is loading and twisting. So if you're washing dishes and you're washing dishes in a sink and you put the dish in the dishwasher, that's loading. You can have a loading of just a dish, but you're holding it, and then you twist and put it down. Or taking clothes out of a washing machine and throwing them into a dryer. That's lifting and twisting. And vacuuming is lifting and twisting. And all of us who work, we got to be careful about loading that spine and lifting and twisting, right? It says, while strongly designed to resist compression, are poorly designed to resist axial rotation, because the collagen fibers, the fibers of the annulus, alternate in direction in successive layers. Only half are available to resist axial rotation in one direction or the other. So the way that disc is made, you're not going to be able, it's not the full disc that handles the rotation, it's just half of it. For stability in rotation, the lumbar vertebra bodies and intervertebral disc rely on the posterior elements of the vertebrae, right? So the range of motion is limited to about 2 degrees or less per segment. You're not going to get a lot of rotation out of that lumbar spine anyway. During flexion, the vertebral bodies, whenever you bend forward, the inferior articular processes glide freely out of the socket. And I'm not going to go into all that. That's complicated for you. It's basically saying until the movement is whenever you move forward, you've got flexibility in that direction to move forward. You just have to be super careful not to load and go forward, because if you load the spine and go forward, now you're going to put pressure on the disc and you're going to kick the nucleus backward, and that's where you can get that disc bulge. So if you're having low back pain and you're having to lift something, what you want to do is really tighten your abs, and you want to hinge at your hip joints and at your knee joints, and at your ankle joints, but you don't want to bend your lumbar spine at all. You want to keep it very secure and solid. That's why having core strength and cerebellum function, the part of your brain that controls those intrinsic muscles, and we talked a little bit about that too, with all the cortisol that we get from being stressed, that'll give up on you, and then you won't be able to get the proper feedback from those areas, and that can cause you to have some problems. So we've got 5 lumbar vertebrae, and they're going to go all the way down to what's called your sacrum. And your sacrum is a triangular bone at the bottom of your spine. And the sacrum is really an interesting bone because it has all kinds of different movement. It can tilt forward and backward. It can tilt right and left. It can rotate itself. And so it's got all kinds of ranges of motion that it's got right there. And so your L5 vertebrae is actually sitting there on your sacrum. So if I could draw it, here's L5, then you've got this triangular bone down at the bottom, and that's called your sacrum. And then the sacrum on the sides, you have your hip bones that come in that are called your ilium. And so you've got those two bones that come in there. And so the connection between the sacrum and the ilium is called your SI joint. This is your old sacroiliac, right? You've heard that. Everybody knows about the SI joint. That's what's going on right there. Is you got the sacrum and the ilium on both sides, and then where they meet is your SI joint. And you've got nerves that are coming out of there, and you have a disc that's right there, that is your L5 disc, and then you have your L5 vertebrae that sits right there on top of it. And just so that's just right there, that's just bone and disc and ligament that's coming along there. So whenever you have a lot of people will tell me, Doc, my sciatica is flaring up. And it's a catch-all term. When we say that, it's we get we get different definitions right there. It's not really clear to us what that means, but that that's what we're trying to say is that we've got some sort of pain in this area, but a lot of times it's not your SI joint. I mean, people think just if they have low back pain in that area that's down there at the low back, then their sciatic nerve, which is a combination of nerves that are coming down there, your sciatic nerve, or you've got SI joint pain. Well, you can also have disc problems at L5. You can also have disc problems at L4. You can also have disc problems at L3, or the combination of all that that's coming down like that. And you've got these little joints. That's what I was talking about. The bottom of the L5 joint makes the joint with the top of the sacrum. Those are called facets. And facet joints get jammed when you've got too much curve. If you got too much curve in your low back, that you can jam those facet joints. And then when those facet joints jam, if you get radiating pain from the facet joints, usually it goes down the back of your leg. If you're getting any pain coming across the front of your leg, if you're getting anything into the groin or anything that goes into the front of the thigh, it's not your facet joints and it's not your SI joint. It's gonna be you're gonna be having trouble with the nerve roots that move up from there. And I know we've covered this on the previous show, but I think it's important to go back and slow down and make sure that I'm explaining this properly just when we're talking about definitions of things. So we've got this whole area right there, and then you get your femur coming in here to make a joint with your ilium, and I didn't draw that very good, but that's your leg bone. So that's your thigh bone. And your thigh bone comes in there and makes that joint. That's your hip joint right there. That everybody, if that wears out, that's where you got to go get a hip replacement, right? So that's kind of the bony structure and the disc. You've got your occiput, you've got your cervical spine, you've got your thoracic spine, you've got your lumbar spine, and you've got your sacrum, and you've got your ilium right there. And so there's a different debate about whether or not, like, how many total vertebrae there is, but your cervical spine has C1 through C7. Then your thoracic spine has T1 all the way down through T12. And remember, all of those have ribs on them. And then you have your lumbar spine, which is L1 through L5. And then you have your sacrum. And above, at the top, above C1, you have your occiput. And those right there, you've got 7 cervical vertebrae, you've got 12 thoracic vertebrae, and you have 5 lumbar vertebrae, so a total of 24 total vertebrae. And then you've got your occiput and your sacrum, and that would be 26 bones. And if you count the ilium, and you've got the little part that you actually sit on is the bottom of that, and that's called the ischium. And so there's 2 of those plus 2 of those. So really, you've got 30 bones involved in all that, not counting the ribs. And if you count the ribs that come in there, now you've got 24 ribs for a total of 54 bones on the backside of your body from your head. Mm, not all the bones in your brain. I mean, not all the bones in your skull, but you've got that's how many total bones that there are. Now think about that. All of those bones have ligaments. All of those bones have muscles that are attached to them, and you've got a whole set of muscles that are attached all the way from top to bottom. You got small muscles connect consecutive spinous processes and transverse processes. And so what that means is you have a vertebrae, you have another one, you have another one. I drew this last night on the show. There's the spinuses, there's the transverse process. And so make sure you guys are seeing that. Yeah. So then you've got these little muscles that run up and down from the spinous to the spinous and the spinous to the spinous. And then you've got muscles that run from the transverse process to the transverse process. And then you've got muscles that run from the spinous to the transverse process. And then you got another one that runs down below it. And then you've got, and they go on both sides. And so you got a whole set of muscles that are all functioning together. Then you got some little muscles that are actually in between there that run up and down. So those are all your intrinsic muscles. And then you've got some bigger muscles that are on top of those. Got some bigger muscles that run on top, and they run all the way up from top the top of your thoracic spine, all the way down long. They're really long muscles that run all the way down into your lumbar spine, and some of those muscles connect all the way down on your sacrum. And so you've got these long muscles that are running all the way down like that, that can go into your hips. Then you've got muscles that are on the top of your ilium that run into the ribs, and that one's called the quadratus lumborum, and that's called the QL muscle. And so that muscle can run in that direction, and it will also connect from the ribs or connect to the spine and bring itself down. But you can strain that muscle if you lift something, and you'll get this back pain that it's like right on the top. It's like right on the top of the hip bone, and you can feel it like right up underneath that rib. And if you strain that muscle, it'll make you malfunction right there, because that creates all kinds of pain if that one's not functioning properly. Then on top of all that, now you've got in the middle of all of that, where you got vertebrae, you got disc, you've got ligaments, you've got muscles, then you got nerves exiting all the way through that thing. And you've got nerves that come around and supply all these muscles. You got nerves that come around to the front and supply that have something to do with your organs, or down here in the bottom, all the sexual organs that are all getting supplied. You got muscles that are the nerves that are running down this way. So it's when a I'll often get the question, "Hey doc, is this muscle or bone?" And it's like, nope, that's not really the right way to ask. That's not really the right question. It's not really muscle or bone. It's all of it together. I never think of it that way, because a muscle doesn't move unless a nerve fires it to move, or that muscle is out of electrolytes and it could cause a spasm, right? So the the muscle is going to be moving when the nerve tells it to move, and the nerve is getting information from the brain, and that's where it traces back to where we keep talking about. That's why we always start with the brain first, because how's the brain firing? Because if the brain's not firing properly, then it's going to feed itself down and the muscles aren't going to be firing properly. So you could pretty much say that low back pain is a secondary problem to the primary problem that happens in the brain. The brain is not firing properly first, then the low back is gives up. The low back malfunctions because the brain's not firing first. That's not something I was taught when I was a kid. That's not something I was taught when I was going through school as an undergraduate or during my graduate program. We didn't talk about that in that manner. And that I'll even present the idea to you that your shoulder, your hip, your knees, your ankles, those problems right there are all secondary to how your brain, which is primary, is firing. And if your brain's not firing properly, then everything below your brain. That's why the upper cervical, they have a we have a whole group of chiropractors that are called upper cervical docs, and they just look at that atlas and that axis, which is the first two vertebrae in your neck, C1 and C2 at the top, and they focus a lot just in that area right there, and they're called upper cervical docs, and it's I would say that they just need to go up one more and go right above it into that occiput, and how that occiput is related to that atlas, and then move right up above it into the brain, because that brain firing is going to determine what is going on below it. If you're having problems with the way that your body is functioning, you should start by analyzing your brain, in my opinion. And um, we could probably make sure that I say that. My job is to detect and correct subluxation. Subluxation means that your body is trying to talk to your brain, and your brain is trying to talk to your body, and somewhere along the way, there's disruption. That's what a subluxation means to me. And it could be in regards to the bones, the disc, the nerves, the muscles, the fascia, any of that. And it can be also primarily, it could be the firing pattern that goes on in the brain. That's why it's so like when we talk about all this stuff, everybody kind of wants to talk about their pain, right? It's like they want to talk about the problems that they're having. Yeah, well, my back hurts or my knee hurts, or okay, well, I understand you don't want to talk. Well, I understand you want to talk about the brain, but what about my knee, right? Or I understand that you want to talk about the brain, but what about this crackling in my neck, or and it's like, okay, I love you. I'm trying to take care of you. I'm trying to do the best I know how, but I'm telling you that the first thing we got to get to fire properly is what's going on above all that, because all this anatomy below it is under the control of the brain. And if the brain's not firing properly, then we can get into some serious issues right there below that. And if we don't get the brain firing properly, we will never get all this to solve itself. It'll be like, we'll just be working on stuff forever if we don't get that brain firing properly. So It took me a long time to get to that level to where I really understood that. And it took a lot of people to help me get to that level to where I understood that. But we finally gotten to that point where it, it's like, look, let's start at the top and let's work our way down. So I know some of this stuff is might be a little boring, but I just wanted to go back and make sure I slowed down a little bit, tried to give you as much information as I could, and we'll continue with some of the definitions tomorrow night. Hope you guys join me. We'll be back at 6 from 6 to 7 tomorrow night on Live with Jason Clemmons, DC. You guys have a great evening, and we'll see you tomorrow.